Welcome back to the Mental Health Toolbox podcast. I'm Patrick Martin, your host, and today we'll be covering the second pillar of coping skills for depression. I am so glad that you're listening in today, and today we'll be talking about activity or behavior, if you would. These terms are used interchangeably. The relationship between activity and our mood is a very specific point we'll be covering, as well as how depression interferes with engaging in activities, and the importance in identifying previously enjoyed activities. All right, so let's do it.
Welcome to the Mental Health Toolbox podcast, where you will gain the knowledge to thrive. Here is your host, licensed psychotherapist, Patrick Martin.
Okay, so the relationship between activity and your mood, and my mood, right? So how we choose to engage and interact with our environment will have a direct impact on how we feel about ourselves, our world, and those we share it with. Okay? So it's how we choose to engage, and that's really important. I want you to remember that we always have a choice in how we're showing up in life. So we get to choose, to some extent, our attitude, but we definitely get to choose when, where, how, and who with, right? And that's huge because there's a lot of things we don't have control over in context, our environment. We always get to choose where we spend our time for the most part and how we choose to show up, okay? And this will make a lot more sense as we go on. So when our behavior is more proactive and therefore more intentional, a few things tend to happen. The first of which is we tend to feel more optimistic, right? That optimism comes from our intent. Because intent, when we're intentional about something, we feel like we have more control because we are choosing to make that happen, right? Because there's something about wanting a certain outcome that we plan for, when we see it come to fruition, or at least anticipate it coming to fruition, we feel more optimistic because it means our ability to predict something is on point. And the thing is, with depression, one of the things you'll notice is our ability to predict positive outcomes is skewed. This is why a lot of people will bow out of activities that they planned for. Parties, going out with a friend, going to the movies, even if it's something you look forward to. If it was a Lakers game, right? I live in the Los Angeles area, so that's applicable. But let's say it was a Lakers game. You bought the tickets in advance. Maybe you got box seats or you knew someone. You've been really looking forward to it. Well, if you get hit with a major depressive episode, you might just throw in the towel and say, no, never mind, take someone else. Even if it's something you enjoy generally and something you look forward to, your ability to predict pleasure is skewed. And even if you were depressed and you went, you would most likely have a better time than you thought you were going to when depressed. So this is why it's really important to try and be intentional about our actions and then play it through. Okay? Because even if we don't think we're going to have the best time because of our mood, we have to trust the process, right? The next thing is it generates more healthy thoughts and creates more happy memories. And those memories remain long after the event has expired, which provides us with better experiences to recall. This helps us sustain and elicit happy moods. Okay? So I just refer to this as a kind of a frame of reference. Okay? So our lived experiences provide us a frame of reference to anticipate future similar situations and occurrences, right? The ability to duplicate a lived experience, right? And this is so important because for people who grow up in toxic environments or that are invalidating, and you combine that with trauma and something like clinical depression or substance abuse, then you most likely have a lot of negative lived experiences, very invalidating lived experiences. And the frame of reference becomes very negative, and so your ability to anticipate positive experiences seems ingenuine and unlikely. And that makes it very hard for someone to believe that things could be different because that hasn't been their experience. So it's very, very important to understand that the more proactive we are and the more intentional we are about making good things happen, the more likely we're going to start banking positive experiences, and that will have an exponential benefit to us when we have new challenges, right? Because one of the phrases I love in therapy that I try and use is when I recognize that somebody has done something brave or difficult in the past, is to pull from that lived experience. Say, oh, well, you can do hard things, right? I use this for myself all the time. Whenever I feel fearful or uncertain, even with this, with podcasting, right? Something new, right? There's always that fear, well, I don't know where to start. I've never done that before. But it doesn't have to be the same thing. You can figure anything out, right? If you believe in the process and your ability to learn and to figure things out and problem solve. And so if I've done something else difficult that I didn't know, right? Everything has a starting point. You figure it out. And so this is that tenacity, that resiliency or X factor that people often refer to, is that in spite of even lack of evidence that somebody can do something, their belief in their ability to figure it out as they go is crucial in predicting their positive outcomes. So that is intentionality. Intentionality does not mean you have it all figured out and laid out A to Z. You know all the facts and all the steps. Being intentional just means, okay, this goal is meaningful to me because of X, and so I'm going to figure out where step one is, and I'll go from there, right? So that's what we're talking about. You can also learn to distract from concerns and use grounding to balance out your emotions, or use emotion regulation, self-soothing. When you're intentional, you also know what your hang-ups are going to be. Know where your buttons are. If you say, oh, people always push my buttons, or that person pushes my buttons, well, you've heard the term, well, don't have so many buttons. That's not practical because our buttons are what they are. But knowing where your triggers are, what triggers you and how you tend to react, is really important, because when we're being intentional about our goals, we have to anticipate the barriers, the hurdles, the things that we can predict so that we can plan for them and plan to sidestep them if necessary, and mitigate the fallout when we are triggered, right? If you have an anger issue, when you feel angry, instead of lashing out verbally, you could decide to take a walk and then come back, right? As opposed to not going to that event or family gathering just to avoid a particular person that triggers you, right? Same idea. So anticipate. This also allows us to improve our physical health, right? Because if we're being intentional, it has a ripple effect. So if I'm intentional about one area of my life, like I want to do better at work, right? Let's say I want to be a more efficient employee, then that same system or rhythm, I start to get into that mindset of how to be more productive, more mindful in the way I'm going about life at work. That I don't leave that mindset at work. When I come home, I'm still me, right? And so if I start to adopt that mindset in one area of my life, when I come home, that same mindset is going to begin to infiltrate, other areas of my home and my role as a husband and a father and my physical health, and because the meanings are similar, right? The reason I would want to be a better employee would likely serve the same value as wanting to be a better father, husband, to be healthier, right? The why is more salient. It's not fixed. It's not compartmentalized to one area of my life. Okay? So we can improve our physical health, which helps us feel better about ourselves, and it solidifies and increases our self-esteem, our identity, our sense of self-worth. Plus, if we're physically feeling better, then even if things aren't going great, we're going to have a higher tolerance for the things that aren't going so well, right? This is why getting good sleep is important. You'll have a higher threshold of stress tolerance if you're physically on the higher end, of not necessarily at your peak, but at least if you have that box checked, good sleep, eating right, eating clean, making sure your micronutrients are up to par, and your macros, right? If you're doing all those things and you're exercising, then you're going to be better adapted to dealing with change and stress, even if you are depressed. And the fun thing about that is it has a direct impact on our mental health. So our ability to bounce back from the depression, that what would have taken you normally 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month to circle back from a depressive episode may take you a week or 2 weeks instead, if you're being more intentional about how you're going about it. Okay, which brings us on to our next point, which is that depression can block us from engaging in proactive behavior, right? So this is the flip side, right? So I say, yeah, it's good to be intentional, it's good to be proactive, so why don't we just do that all the time? What gets in the way? So depression has some sneaky tricks to trip us up from being intentional about our behavior. Okay, and one of these ways is sapping us of our motivation to be proactive, right? A lot of people will come to the therapy office and say, well, I just want to be motivated. Or if we're talking about goals, well, I just don't feel motivated. I'll do this when I feel like I can. Or kind of like they're waiting for an epiphany or a surge of energy. But this is a trap. We'll talk more about this, but motivation is not spontaneous. If you remember inertia, right? A body at rest tends to stay at rest. A body in motion tends to stay in motion. It's the idea that motivation does not come before our behavior. It comes after. So what I try and tell clients is, rather than seek or wait for motivation, seek inspiration, right? Inspiration comes from intention. Every day, I saturate my mind with podcasts from people that inspire me, right? I'm going to say that again. Every day, I saturate my mind with podcasts of people that inspire me, okay? It could be from all walks of life. It doesn't really matter. It's whatever resonates with you, and you don't always know, right? I try and leave enough room to explore new podcasts or other forms of stimuli or books or YouTube videos or articles on the internet. I'll browse particular topics, or I'll use an app on my phone like Blinkist that allows me to get a synopsis of famous books if I don't have time to digest a whole one, because it sets my mind, and it also allows me to explore new categories of things that can inspire me. So it's almost like a pursuit. You've heard of the term pursuit of happiness? Well, I would say it's a pursuit of inspiration, because if you find things that inspire you, it's going to be a whole lot easier to get moving. And once you get moving towards something and you see progress, then the motivation comes, not before. So if you're waiting to feel motivated to be proactive, you're going to be waiting a very long time, if not indefinitely. And I don't know that a lot of people talk about that, because it's not something. It's kind of like we talked about in the last pillar of skills, thinking we're not taught to think about our thinking. It's just not really something we do. We don't really talk about the process of motivation so much. We talk about practical skills, and I'm very practical. It's the stuff I love is practical wisdom. But motivation is not a tangible thing. It's a very internal experience, and it's not constant. Inspiration isn't constant. It's not like, ooh, okay, so it's a switch you turn on and then you're good. No, it's an ebb and a flow. I'll feel inspired and motivated, and then tired and anhedonic and disinterested, all within the same hour, of the day. And I understand that, and that's a big part of the process is learning that moods they ebb and they flow, and it's okay. And I know if I just write it out, or if I'm intentional and proactive, if I notice my dip is going a bit too long, then I'll have to flip on a podcast or do something that kind of jolts me back into that mindset and helps me remember why something is important to me. Now, this is also important to say that if you're feeling fatigued for an extended period of time, it could be your body saying, hey, slow down if you're trying to do too much, which I've become better at. If I'm going, too long, too strong at work and I have a little window, I'll go to my car and take a 15-minute nap. I'm a big believer in cat naps, but nothing more than 30 minutes, okay? For all of you nappers out there, you're after my own heart, but nothing more than 30 minutes. And there's a lot of research behind that. It messes up your circadian rhythm. It'll increase your insomnia at night, and it has the opposite effect. Whereas a cat nap, 15, 20 minutes, actually helps your brain work better. Like sleeping too long is going to slow you down. So just a little note of caution there. Okay. So it can sap us of our motivation to be proactive. We talked about that. Fatigue, right? So we all know that depression can cause fatigue. But knowing that is a big deal because then you can plan for it. It can also flatten our interest in being active. So I just mentioned this, but it's called anhedonia. Anhedonia is the clinical term for the flattening of our interest in things. So that's a symptom of depression if you're actually trying to assess for depression, or if you're depressed, or if a therapist is looking for signs of depression. That's a big red flag. Is somebody loves to read books and they just stop reading books for a month. That's not great. You want to keep your eye on that because it's okay to take breaks from things. That's normal to get disinterested or change interests. But if people just stop engaging in things that they typically would otherwise, that's a red flag for depression. It can also cause physical fatigue. We talked about that. It can cause somatic symptoms, stomach aches, headaches, body aches. And it can also encourage negative self-talk, which produces low self-worth, low self-esteem. No surprise that depressed people have low self-esteems, or that they might have negative self-talk. But it's important to mention because the battle is in the brain. The battle is in our thought, our dialogue, that committee in our head, because it is how we're making sense of the world around us. And more importantly, it's how we are giving meaning to the events around us and that are happening to us, and how we are being assessed and appraised by others. So the way we talk to ourselves is of the utmost importance. And if you are aware that maybe you're someone that struggles more with the self-talk, then that is something you can watch for and you can work on it, right? So being aware. All right, so the next thing we're going to discuss is other ways depression interrupts our flow. You've heard that term, flow. It's very popular these days in positive psychology. You hear about flow experts, right? Business, in the business world and otherwhere. But I think of flow as our ability, our rhythm in life to be present, to be mindful, grounded, where we're being efficient in our life domains and living in and through our systems that work. That's our flow. But depression can throw a wrench in it, where we're not being as productive. And that can look like social isolation, which tends to lead to loneliness and lack of social support. That's because the longer we isolate, the more likely people are to stop calling us, stop texting us, stop checking in on us, because we are not reciprocating. And if people try and reach out and you block them, then they're going to respect your unspoken boundary to leave you alone. Okay? It can also cause us to become hyper-focused on our stressors, right? So that myopic view of all that is wrong in the world and why your life is somehow significantly different than other people who are having problems because it's happening to you, and it feels like the universe is acting against you. We become hyper focused on all of the things we're unhappy with in terms of ourselves, maybe the way we look, the way we feel, the amount of friends we do or don't have, our romantic relationships, our financial situation, our housing, and it can feel all encompassing and very fixed, like this will never change. Okay, so that will interrupt our flow, because it's really hard to focus on the future and your goals and being proactive and intentional about your physical and mental health if you're constantly thinking about the things you're not happy with, right? You've heard that saying, can't see the forest through the trees, right? It's that idea that we don't want to focus on the problem as much as we want to look toward solutions. I'm going to say that again. We don't want to focus so much on the problem as much as the solutions. Now, we have to look at the problem long enough to identify that there is a problem. Otherwise, we have no idea what to set goals around, right? If you don't know that you're overweight or that that's something that bothers you, how then are you supposed to set a fitness goal? You can't. And more importantly, you have to understand your problem enough that you can define it in absolute concrete terms. The more specific you can drill down on it, the easier it is to plan your way out of it. As Dave Ramsey always says, you can wander into debt, but you can't wander out. It's the same way with our problems in life and pretty much every domain in our life, is that oftentimes we wander into situations and circumstances that we're not happy with, but we can't wander out. We have to find out what went wrong and how we can dig ourselves out of a hole. And we don't usually do that in isolation or alone. It usually requires a lot of help. We all need help. So it's okay to ask for help. It can also block our thought process, making it difficult to come up with ideas for self-care and activities, right? Leaving us feeling stuck and not knowing where to start. So you hear this a lot from people who are depressed. They say they just feel stuck. It's almost like analysis paralysis. Like they're afraid that if they do anything that is, the other shoe is going to drop. If they make a decision, it's going to be the wrong decision. And oftentimes this is what leads people into therapy. They're just afraid of failing anymore. And it's a trap because the best place to start is anywhere, right? When we're talking about change, we have to get things moving and then we can assess as we go. And that's a big part of therapy, is having a sounding board so you can bounce your ideas off of someone and they can stimulate and challenge your thoughts, but more likely your limiting thoughts about why you're not taking action in the first place. And to give you, information that you can act on. Ideas. Okay, so how do we fight back against these roadblocks that depression tries to put in front of us? I'll tell you. By listing your needs and values. Okay? If you want to fight back, you need to list your needs and your values. This will make it easier to choose meaningful activities that can create positive outcomes and sustainable habits so that you can automate into your lifestyle the things that matter most. All right? So you can automate into your life the things that matter the most. Because if you implement and act on things that have meaning and value to you, even if you don't feel like you're ready, you're going to be more likely to stay committed because it's a very personal goal to you as opposed to putting out some arbitrary goal. Like, I just want to be happy. Well, what does that mean to you, really? What is happy? How do you define that? Well, everybody's going to define that differently because their values are different, you see. So keep that in mind. Listing your values and your needs will give you a blueprint in how you set your goals and be proactive and intentional to push back against the blocks and hurdles that depression will lay out before you. Okay? All right, let's move on. All right, so let's get down to the nuts and bolts here. So since we're in the second pillar and we're talking about activities, we're really talking about behavior, okay? One of the problems with depression is that it takes a lot of mental RAM to try and figure out new situations and new ideas and how to get re-engaged in life. And this is why I would tell you don't. Rather, save your mental energy and start by recalling activities that you used to enjoy, right? Start with what worked in the past, right? Start with how you coped before, right? Your baseline. Like, how did life look like when you weren't this depressed or this messed up? Like, what were you doing? What were you engaged in? What were your hobbies? Who were you hanging out with? Because when you're depressed, it requires far more energy to postulate activities that you might enjoy and then work out all the details about how you might execute on that, let alone the anxiety and fear of the unknown, new people, new places, right? So figuring out what has worked in the past, places that are familiar. If you know the place, you don't have to spend as much time trying to imagine what that looks like. You already know what it looks like. You know what that gym looks like. You know what that church looks like. You've been there. It's easier to go through the motions. I often use the analogy of the grocery store. If I know that I need to go swing by the grocery mart after work, I know where the milk aisle is. I know where the bread is. I know where the eggs are. I know where the lunch meat is. And in my mind, before I'm even at the store, I can run down the list in my head, and I've been there to that market so many times. I could tell you exactly the order and to get things to be in and out the quickest, right? That's what I'm talking about. But if you tell me to go to a Albertsons or Vons or Stater Brothers at a different location that I haven't been to, yeah, they might have a similar layout, but it's going to take me 5 times as long to figure out where things are. And that's going to spend a whole lot more mental energy just trying to process that. And we're just talking about milk and eggs here. I'm not talking about doing life, right? Activities, people, relationships. And so you can maybe see my point. And so when you start out with an activity that is already familiar to you, you automatically bridge that gap of the uncertain and allow for quicker action. That is the key. The goal here is to get unstuck, to get moving in a direction of action as quickly as possible. If you drain your motivation in planning new activities, you will never get out the front door. By highlighting the symbiotic relationship between activity and your mood, you will be better equipped to recall effective coping. I'm going to say that again. By highlighting the symbiotic relationship between activity and your mood, you will be better equipped to recall effective coping. Furthermore, if you spend all your energy on the minutiae and nuances of starting something new, then you will often postpone your planned activity until a quote, more convenient time. All right? So save your mental RAM, do what's familiar to get unstuck, and then we can start talking about how to plan for new activities once you get some of your momentum back up. All right? This brings us to the A/B test. Now, you may have not heard of the A/B test, right? But the A/B test is a business term. When in marketing, it's when you're not sure what idea is going to have the biggest impact, you have to test one idea against another. Let's say it's a sales email format, and you're not really sure which pitch is more effective. Well, you send out one pitch to half your audience and a different pitch to the other half, and then you see the results and you think, oh, well, A did better than B, and so then you nix B, and then you don't stop there. You find out if there's another, more efficient way to write an email, and so you test the original A against a new B, and you just keep doing this A/B test until you find out the most comfortable, most efficient, effective method. And that is how you kind of do life. And we do this automatically. We don't really think about it growing up. But this is how we figure out how the world works, how relationships work, how to say hello to someone, right? Do we shake their hand? Do we not shake their hand? We're reading their facial expressions, their body language. And a lot of this stuff is learned without really realizing we're learning it as we grow and we learn to assess in the moment. Okay, so a unique characteristic of depression is its impact on our ability to accurately predict the amount of pleasure a given activity will bring us. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Pleasure predicting. Our pleasure predicting capacity is skewed when we're depressed. In order to combat this, it is really helpful to rate our anticipated pleasure before an activity and then our actual level of satisfaction after that activity. Right? So it's literally just what it sounds like, and it doesn't need to be complicated. You can say, oh, okay, so I plan on going to the movies with my friend Joe. I'm depressed. I don't really want to go now. In fact, I feel like calling and canceling, but I'm trying to do things different. I'm trying to get unstuck now, right? So instead, I'm just going to rate my anticipated pleasure on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most pleasurable. And after the movie's over and I come home, I will rate how much I actually enjoyed the activity. And you'll be surprised with the results, because more often than not, it's not going to be like day and night kind of difference, right? Usually. But you'll see that there will be a discrepancy between what you thought was going to happen and how you actually felt. Because in most cases, once we engage in activity, we are usually glad we did. I'm not saying you're going to be ecstatic, but usually you enjoyed it more than you thought you would. So this really allows for a clean way to conduct reality testing and challenge our harmful thoughts that stem from depression. These are the thoughts that keep us isolated. To stay in line with this whole CBT model that I've been discussing with you, I do suggest using a scale of 1 to 9, 9 being the happiest, 1 being the most depressed, but you do what works for you. If 1 to 5 works better, stick with that. All right. And what all of this does is it allows us to make informed decisions, right? To stop doing life as if we're just some bystander in a whirlwind and everything just kind of happens and It's a luck of the draw, right? Hopefully life doesn't, beat us up too bad. But when you start to realize that you can make informed decisions and be intentional about how you do life, it changes everything. So another helpful application of the A/B test is it provides data points to compare future activities against. Okay? It gives you a baseline that you can test future activities against. If you had fun going to the movies with Joe, well, then you're probably going to have fun going to the movies with Joe, Jill, and Bob, right? So you can build on that. Or you might have fun doing a movie night at your house or at Joe's house, and you make a thing of it. Maybe it becomes a monthly thing that you just do. And I'm telling you, that's the kind of stuff that will shake your world when it comes to depression, when you start to figure out how you can implement these things into your life that work. Okay? For example, if in a given month you go to a ball game, a movie, and the gym, you would have 3 data points based on your rated pleasure after the activity. After completing all 3, you could review the level of satisfaction for each and then make an informed decision about the type of activities you want to prioritize for the next month. And you might even decide to join an interest group around that subject. All right, a great place to find meetup groups, activities, interest groups is meetup.com. That's not a dating site. It's just a cool site I refer clients to find activities with other people along similar interests. Okay? But back to the point is, if you just did one thing, and yeah, you had an okay time or a better time than you thought, you could build on that. But it's much more effective if you've tried a variety of things and you kind of compare one to the other with an A/B test. You can figure out what has the most potential to bring up your mood, and you can build on that and scale it and incorporate it into your social life. All right? All right. Okay, still with me? All right. So now let's recap everything we went over just to make sure we didn't miss anything, okay? So the first point, how we interact with our environment impacts how we feel about it. All right? How we interact with our environment impacts how we feel about it. So guess what? You get a choice in the matter. You get to choose how you interact with your environment, and that's going to directly flavor your feelings about it. Okay? Second point, lack of interest in activities, also known as anhedonia, is a common symptom of depression. It's a symptom. Okay? It's not an end-all be-all. It's just a symptom. Okay? It doesn't mean that everything is fixed and final. So you still have to do life, and you can still make choices. The symptom, the feeling is not fixed. It's not always going to feel that way. And when the fog clears and your mood comes back up, you're going to be glad you chose to be consistent and intentional. Okay. Third point, choosing to be proactive in our efforts to engage our environment will help to improve our mood, which in turn motivates us to stay in motion. Inertia. And lastly, there is an intrinsic relationship between activity and your mood. Just like we talked about, our thoughts and our mood are closely tied, so is our behavior. Okay? So what do you need to do with this information? This is what I want you to practice. Make a list of activities that you used to enjoy. Choose an activity off the list that you will start with. Okay, so just compile a list of things that you used to do, used to be involved with, used to have fun with. Could be by yourself, could be with others, doesn't matter. And then once you have that list, You're going to pick something to start with. I want you to predict a pleasure of the activity and satisfaction after you engage in the activity on a scale of 1 to 9, 9 being the happiest, 1 being the most depressed, or the least pleasurable. Try and predict what the outcome is going to be. If you do more than one in the course of a month, rate their outcomes against each other like we talked about in the A/B test, and keep a running list of the most effective activities in improving your mood. Here's a hint. You can also start rating them in level of intensity as a part of your coping skills list, okay? Not all activities require the same level of intensity, and so that could help you kind of gauge as well. All right, so in the next episode, we will be covering the second skill in this pillar of activities, and we'll be talking about how to plan for starting new activities in the face of depression. Not just resuming old activities, but how do we move from our comfort zone to our discomfort zone and do things that are unfamiliar to us, all right? So don't miss that episode. Until then, Thrivers, I want you to go make good things happen, use these tools, and start changing your life, all right? Now, if you are in crisis or feeling excessively depressed, do keep in mind there's lots of help out there. There's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255, or you can text START, S-T-A-R-T, to 741-741. If you're looking for mental health help referrals, you can contact the NAMI Referral Helpline at 1-800-950-6264. And of course, if you would like a copy of the mood scale tool, you can jump over to the mentalhealthtoolbox.com and just subscribe to the newsletter there. You'll get the free mood scale tracking tool. And you can also shoot me a message through the contact form. I'll also put a link to that in the show notes. If you have any questions or specific topics you would like me to cover here on the podcast, I would be more than happy to add that to the content calendar so I can serve you better. Okay? And as always, remember, I am a therapist, but I'm not your therapist. And if you need a professional, you should get one. All right? You take it easy, and I will catch you next episode. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for listening to the Mental Health Toolbox Podcast. Learn more at www.thementalhealthtoolbox.com.